right, let's do it.
So, welcome to South Orange Library's Special Conversations program. I'm Laura Sims, the host, and I'm very happy to be here with Marietta Zacker tonight. And we're going to talk about diverse voices, especially Latinx voices in 21st century publishing tonight. And before we get into that, I will just tell you a bit about Marietta. So Marietta Zacker has worked with books, authors, and illustrators throughout her career, studying, creating, editing, marketing, teaching, and selling, basically everything. Anything you can do with a book
Related,
right?
I've done it.
That's great. She supports independent book selling, believes in libraries, thank you, and takes pride in her work as a Latina in the world of publishing. In 2021, her short story, Counting on Esteban, anchored the anthology Allies, which is right here, and we have it in the collection, published by DK. She's co-owner of and literary agent at Galt and Zacker Literary Agency and considers herself the luckiest person on earth to be mommy to 3 fabulous humans and wife to an exceptional spouse. So, welcome, Marietta. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I thought we could start. I know you have some wonderful books by your clients and other agents in your agency's clients. And so if you'd like to share any of those first or talk about them.
Sure. I mean, I thought that we would ease into that, but we can do it because I think that it'll be part of the conversation.
Okay, sure.
I don't want it to seem like I'm just highlighting. I just think that a lot of what I do obviously is connected to what these creatives create.
Exactly.
And so I say we ease into it.
Okay, perfect. Well, my first question is how, I know that you had, a different path to get to where you are now as a literary agent. And so I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, it was definitely an unexpected road, or not one that I think most people follow, but it landed me in the exact right place. So I was a teacher, and without a doubt, my students were the ones who made me realize that literature for me was the way into their heart, soul, mind, everything. And so
what grade did you teach?
I started teaching kindergarten.
Oh.
And I started teaching through a program called Teach for America.
Oh yeah.
So I was in a situation where there was a lot of belief that these kids could and should thrive, but there wasn't, at the time, there wasn't a really strong curriculum. There wasn't really, certainly in kindergarten, it was like, do your best, was basically what it felt like.
Wow.
So I went to the library every week and I took out a stack of books.
Yeah.
And I used that as the basis for my curriculum. And I would open a book and think, okay, what things from here does a kindergarten need to know?
Right.
And I was teaching in Spanish and English.
Okay.
My kids were all from Mexico.
Okay.
I taught in Houston, Texas, and where I was, they happened to all be from Mexico, which is super surprising for Houston.
Right.
And they had, it was interesting because it was a bilingual classroom, but they really were monolingual Spanish speakers. And their parents were monolingual Spanish speakers.
Right.
So all that to say that books were really the way that I connected life to their experiences and what they were trying, or what we were trying to teach them, what I was trying to teach them. So the books kind of, from the beginning, was like, this is the way in. And storytelling in particular, it was such an important part of my childhood that I realized that by telling a story, it didn't feel to them like they were learning. And they were learning Spanish and English at the same time. They could speak Spanish, but they didn't have a command of the language.
Right.
So, and in order for them to learn English, they had to transfer some of those skills that they had from when they were born and from when, their parents speaking to them, their guardians speaking to them. So, again, books were my way in.
Yeah.
So I went from there to studying children's literature when I got my master's degree.
Okay.
And then it made sense to me, although there were a few other stops along the way, it made sense to me that publishing and helping creatives create books that would then one day end up in classrooms and in school libraries and of course in homes was a natural fit for me. So I was on the editorial side in New York City.
Okay.
Eventually made my way to agency.
Yeah.
The road was much longer, but essentially
But-
that's how I ended there.
Yeah.
And it was my love of storytelling in books that
Right.
made it just the right fit for me.
Right, that's perfect. Yeah, I read somewhere in an interview with you where you said that you love books that don't feel like they're trying to teach you something,
Yeah.
but that make you feel, and I love that. And I feel like that's, probably something, well, that you knew instinctively, but also from watching the kids in
Right.
the classroom respond to books, respond much better
Right.
to stories than like lessons.
Right, and I tell prospective writers and people who are thinking about getting into the industry, I know as adults we have a lot of knowledge to impart. And I get that, and I do believe that the majority, if not every book, has something to teach. But for me, it's really about the story. I think
Yeah.
inherently when we are connecting with other human beings, whether on the page or in person, of course there's something for you to learn. There's
Right.
always something for you to be inspired by.
Right.
But for me, the book, the trade literature, which is what I specialize in,
Yeah.
it's really about the story.
Yeah.
And once you make that human connection, at times, you're simply entertained, which is just as valuable as having a very, important lesson.
Yeah.
And then there are some books that, of course, have all these lessons, layer upon layer of lessons. Whether or not the reader takes that at any given time is up to them, but it's really about the story.
Yeah. It reminds me of, when I talk to friends who are parents, it reminds me of the librarian perspective too, about reading, of, when parents are like, oh, but they're just reading like, I'm blanking on, Big Nate, or,
Right.
they're just reading trash.
Right.
And you wanna say, no, it's wonderful, they are connecting, they're reading stories, this is how they learn to love
Yeah,
reading,
and
right?
actually, interestingly,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that people say often right now is, oh, it's a graphic novel.
Oh, right, yeah.
Graphic
Like
novels,
it's
right?
less than.
Right, it's
Yeah.
less than, and I'm like, are you
No.
kidding me? And interestingly, this book, Isla to Island by Latinx Castellanos, is a middle grade graphic novel, and it is entirely in pictures.
Wow.
So there
That's so
is no
cool.
dialogue, and it is really just pictures. One of my favorite books of all time. And they're actually, spoiler alert, there are actually 3 words, they come in the last frame of the book. And when I read this book, not only is it, I think, an amazingly illustrated book,
Yeah.
but the story itself is endearing, and it, quite frankly, reminded me a lot of myself. When I came to this country, I didn't know the language, and the reason why Marisol, who is the main character, the reason why there are no words is because she can't speak English. She's a Spanish speaker, she
Right.
comes doing Pedro Pan from Cuba,
Yeah.
and she is left in New York City, or left alone in New York City with her host family. Host family speaks English, but she doesn't, and it's all from her perspective.
Wow.
But to me, a kid who reads this and finally understand, or perhaps either understands something that they don't know or sees themselves in it,
Yes.
is more magical than any amount of words that you could have put in this book.
Right.
And brilliantly, it's only in that last frame where you hear her speak for the first time.
Wow.
And when I read the manuscript, I cried. And I said, this is storytelling at its peak.
Yeah.
It is an entire middle grade novel simply in pictures.
Yeah.
And if a parent or a teacher or librarian would ever tell me this is not a book, I would cry.
Yeah.
And then I would sit down with them and say, let's talk this through,
Yeah.
because this is a story.
Of course,
And it's an
right.
example.
Yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely. This is just like a nuts and bolts question, but when you have when writers come to you or illustrators, is it usually all together, like the whole package,
Great
or do
question.
you pair?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our job is to find the right homes for manuscripts or illustrations in publishing houses. So there are times when an author is an author illustrator, and they both write and illustrate, of course.
Yeah.
You just heard that they have no words, so
Right.
writing.
It's 3
But I have to
words.
say, the script was just as long, because
Yeah.
she had to write out what was happening in the story. So it is
right.
she did write the
Yeah,
book.
of course,
They're
yeah.
just that there's no dialogue and there are no other words in there.
Right.
There's no narration. There are some books where the author writes the book, so Lucia la Luchadora, which is just such a fun book. It was written by Cynthia Leonor Garza, and it was illustrated by somebody else who's not my client.
Okay.
So Elisa Bermudez, who's amazing, not my client, but amazing just as much. So the words, essentially the text was sent, I sent the text to a publisher,
Okay.
the editor wanted to publish the book, they then went and found Elisa Bermudez to illustrate the book.
I see.
So sometimes it's a picture, sometimes it's the illustration, sometimes it's both.
Right.
I don't have, yeah, so anyway, there are some books where the illustrations come first and they call me, the art director or the editor calls me and says, I have this amazing manuscript, do you have an illustrator that can be, that can do the cover for this, or do the illustrations for this book, or sometimes the cover.
Yeah, so you represent illustrators, authors, and author illustrators.
Right, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah, it's kind of fun.
That's really fun. And so I'll ask you a general question.
Sure.
Why is it important to have diverse characters and writers and stories in literature, children's literature specifically, but
Yeah, I mean,
why is that important?
I don't know how it couldn't be important, right? I mean, how, for those who have grown up on the books that we've had throughout time, ask yourself, what if those books that represented you or represented your experience in some way, or where you see yourself, imagine if you didn't have that, right? Imagine if you read only books that were to you completely devoid of anything that meant something to you, or that where you saw yourself or where you experienced those things. If you can picture yourself with that, which I think for many people it's unimaginable, but for those of us who have never seen themselves in books, or who have rarely seen themselves in books, try to flip that on its head and imagine what it would feel like. It's a strange thing to walk around this world feeling like you don't exist beyond your own experience,
Right.
or the ones of your family. And when you see things in media, whether it's TV, film, advertisements, books, when you don't see yourself, inevitably you devalue who you are as a human being.
Right.
So I just don't know how else it could be. When people ask me about the clients that I represent and those who I choose to represent, many of them come from marginalized communities in one way, shape, or form. And it's not, I mean, I guess it's deliberate, but it's also the only thing I know. Right? The stories that they're telling resonate with me.
Right.
And I can talk about them with editors and art directors, and so it just makes sense to me. So, kids who don't see themselves, Furia by Jamile Said Mendez, it's about a young soccer player, a young adult soccer player, and you read this book, she's from Argentina, and she does things differently, and it's not that it's better, it's not that it's an experience that somebody in Kansas may never have had.
Right, yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, but until you read about it, A, you don't know that it exists, you don't value it, and B, you don't open your world outside of your own, because we all live in our bubbles, right? So it just makes so much sense to me that that books and other media encompass the world that we live in.
Right.
In its totality, with all of the beauty that we have, with all of the people who exist, not just one perspective.
Right.
So,
Right.
it just makes sense to me.
Yeah. And have you noticed a change in receptivity in the publishing world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's slow going. It's slower than we would want, which is not surprising given our world, I suppose. But it's a shame because it automatically makes life richer. So it to me, again, it kind of goes without saying. But there is more. I think because there has been a groundswell of authors and illustrators who have stood and said, I no longer accept the fact that my story doesn't matter. And I think because it's coming from the creatives, who, let's be honest, without them, publishing wouldn't exist, right? I mean, we can talk about all of the people in the CEO level and the CFO level and all of that who make a company, but the reality is that nobody would have a job without those who are creating the art. And so I think those creatives are tired of not seeing themselves and are tired of showing books to their own children or their students in a classroom or what have you, that don't make sense to them or that don't resonate with them to the extent that something else might. So So I do think that there's been a shift, and I think throughout time we have seen that shift. I know I saw it in the classroom as a teacher, and it kind of ebbs and flows a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think we've reached a point. I hope that we've reached a point that we will no longer accept the steps backwards, and
Right.
instead we'll just figure out how to continue to celebrate all of our backgrounds,
Yeah.
of all kinds.
Right.
Not just one or two or even three,
Yeah.
but, if we truly are a group of people who are accepting of everyone and anyone, then we need to show that in our media.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what do you do personally and I know you have a lot of clients who are widely diverse, but what else do you do, I guess, to help get those voices into the world?
We talk a lot in publishing about making sure that the editors, art directors, sales, marketing, school and library folks, the CEOs, the CFOs, the CMOs, that all of them, that there's an understanding that without filling those jobs with people who are just as diverse as the books that we're trying to put out, it'll be hard to keep that momentum going. In part because we all naturally, again going back to all living in our own bubbles, we all know only as much as what we live.
Right.
And so if we have a room full of people who have other perspectives, we will naturally want to publish and talk about and push different kinds of books that have a different kind of perspective.
Right.
So we talk a lot in the industry about hiring and retention, which is one of the bigger problems. I think we can hire a lot of people fresh out of college, but then how do we retain people?
Right.
And how do we make people feel comfortable enough to say, this is some place I can call home during the times that I am at work, right? It's a place that I can feel comfortable in and that I can voice my opinion and my perspective and not be told, well, yeah, that sounds nice, but that's not the way we do it here.
Right.
Which is what, quite frankly, happens often because it's easier to stay with what you know.
Yeah.
It's easier for everyone in the world to do what is most comfortable.
Right.
But what if we fight a little harder to do something that's uncomfortable? It'll eventually be comfortable and then we'll all be fine.
Right.
I mean, I know that's simplistic and I know it's like, oh great, we've solved the problem, and I know it's not that easy, but in some ways it is.
Yeah.
In some ways it's the willingness to change and a willingness to just do something a little differently.
Right.
Or think about things a little differently, or be uncomfortable in a situation and read a book and say, I have no idea what some of that means. I mean, you can read the words and understand them, but the experience is different.
To them,
and that's okay, because you'll learn something from that. Kind of going back to the idea that every book has something to teach you. Well then, read a book that makes you say, huh? And either look it up or keep on reading, or what have you. I think there are many ways to slice that, but I think there is more than just publishing books. There's supporting the creatives. There's making sure publishing houses are also following that same kind of thought process.
Right.
There's helping them retain the talent that they get to work at their publishing houses, and overall being. I think we all need to be mentors for those who are there. So it is certainly multi-layered, and it is sometimes a little tiring, but I think it's worth it, and I think it's a necessity if we're really going to get past we can only have one perspective in this country.
Right. Right. Yeah. And don't you also work with the We Need Diverse Books project?
Right. So so we need diverse books, and I think, inevitably that goes back to my thought that it starts, not that it starts, but this particular kind of push has come from the creatives, the authors and the illustrators. It is a nonprofit organization that's run by authors and illustrators, and they all donate a ton of time to making sure that push towards diversity doesn't go away. It's not a trend. It's not a checking off the boxes. It's an understanding that we really need to continue to work at that and have those different perspectives in. So We Need Diverse Books has been doing a phenomenal job for years now, and I was part of kind of the founding group. It started in, I'm going to get this so wrong because I'm not going to know exactly, but I want to say now it's been a decade.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
At least.
Yeah.
forgive me if that's not there yet, but it was certainly about a decade, I think a little more.
Okay.
And it really is just a massive and fabulous organization that's really keeping the conversation alive,
Right.
at the very least, but I think it's doing much more than that.
Okay.
But it's certainly keeping the conversation alive.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I also read another quote, I think in a bio of yours, where you say, diversity in the story must be inherent and authentic, not trendy. And I'd love for you to talk about that, like how do you recognize that in a manuscript? And,
Boy, that's tricky.
Is it
I mean,
just a
well, it is and it
distinctive-
isn't.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, some of it is instinctual,
Right.
sure, but I think when it comes from an authentic place, it reads differently, which I know
Right.
doesn't really answer your question, but it reads differently. It's not an outsider looking in. It feels the voice and the I was gonna say detail, but it's really beyond the details, because anyone can look up, how to make a particular dish and then describe it
Right.
fully, right? But it's a feeling there's a depth to it
Yeah.
that I think doesn't appear if you're just Wikipediaing it, as we say, right?
Right.
There's research that can be done for sure,
Yeah.
but having lived experience
Yeah,
is invaluable.
right.
And it doesn't mean that everyone has to have that experience. I mean, I understand that we have to also write outside of our circle,
Yeah.
right? And not everything, as a Latina, I can't write only about Latinos, because that's not actually my world either.
Right.
It's also not the greater world, and it's not necessarily the story that I might be telling at that
Right.
particular time.
Right.
So there is, research that needs to be done, but it needs to be more than just surface.
Yeah.
It needs to be more than just, I read it in Wikipedia,
Yeah.
right? It needs to really be something that is authentic.
Yeah.
Not to try to define the word with the word, but
Yeah.
it needs to
Yeah.
come from a very real place.
Yeah.
And that can be a number of things. Many of my clients write, it's not that all their work is biographical, but there is that element of truth that comes out, I
Yeah.
think, in anyone's writing.
Yeah.
So there's, their own background, it's people's willingness to dig deeper
Right.
and to, when they need to do research, to really go deeper
Yeah.
than just a simple
Googling.
Google it or whatever,
Yeah.
Or what we all, and quite frankly, I think we all do this, we rely on certain markers like clothing and food, which is valid, right?
Right.
But it's not everything.
Right.
So it's hard when people come at it from just that perspective, and quite frankly, I think food is one of the easier ones.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to somebody's culture, background, ethnicity, that just relying on some of those markers isn't
It's
the
like
most
putting
ideal.
up little pretty things in
Right.
a manuscript, right?
Right, not to mention that, I think what happens a lot with, doing researching time is that you go with what's very general,
Yeah.
right? It's very easy, especially in America, to talk about Latinos by describing Taco Bell or something like that,
Yeah.
right? Which is, I hesitate in even saying it because it's offensive to even speak it, but, what I mean Taco Bell, I mean, that general, you make everyone like that kind of food and put a hat on them and, and that kind of thing, and it's like, okay, we're really there are so many of us out there, and there's not one way to describe a Latino,
Yeah.
so it needs to go beyond that superficiality,
Right.
for sure. So,
Yeah.
so I think we look for authenticity in background, authenticity in how they're telling the story,
Right.
what perspective they have, and where, if it's somebody who's Puerto Rican, they might be on the island, but they might not be, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
what does that look like for me? And
Yeah.
what does it feel like to be in my skin? And what does it feel like for me to walk out of my house every day?
Right.
And that's different than for other people from different backgrounds,
Yeah.
even if they're Latino,
Right.
right? Like there's definitely, there's a different way of walking on this earth, and you just have to have some of that lived experience, or at least know how to research it well.
Yeah. And do you have books in that pile that speak to that?
Oh
Like,
my goodness, yes, so many,
I mean,
actually,
maybe
yes.
many of them, right?
Right, so like Boogie Boogie Y'all is a picture book by C.G. Esperanza.
Oh, cool.
And in essence, it's the story of graffiti art in the
Ooh.
Bronx.
Yeah.
And he's Afro-Latino, and he talks about, well, he does, I mean, he lets this young girl show you what it's like to both walk the streets of the Bronx and in essence, give you a history of graffiti.
Oh, cool.
So it's just so much fun.
Yeah.
And the audio edition of this, which with Charles, his name is Charles, which Charles narrated, won an Odyssey. So
Oh.
he raps the song. What is the song? He raps
Yeah.
the text, and it's just it's fabulous. And he both wrote and illustrated it, and it's just a ton of fun. But again, his grandfather is Puerto Rican. His father might be as well. Not 100% sure, but
Yeah.
but as an Afro-Latino who has Puerto Rican roots, his experiences and my experiences were very different, right? So we can both, in our bio, I guess officially say that we're Latinx, but again, his
Such
experience is different than
different
mine, so you
experiences,
can't just put us in as a monolith, because
Right.
we're not, right? So there's a lot of, can't speak. There's so many things so many stories that I can tell you, but this is a story, Mambo Mucho Mambo. Written by a white Jewish man, but
Okay.
illustrated by Eric Velasquez. So Dean Robbins is my client.
Yeah.
He does such a beautiful job.
Yeah.
He comes at it from understanding jazz really well, music
Okay.
really well. He's a journalist. He knows it like the back of his hand.
Wow.
He is Jewish himself. This is a story of what it was like when essentially people came together during a time when you went to clubs in New York City.
Yeah.
You either had to go to an all-white club, or if you were black or brown, you could only go to clubs that allowed you to come in. And
Right.
this is a story of when all of that came together in one club,
Wow.
right? And Eric Velasquez, who's the illustrator, is Afro-Latino. So together they made a beautiful book, but Dean was really careful in making sure that he was being as accurate and as authentic in both sides of that
Yeah,
story,
I see,
right? So he just did a fabulous job, and it was translated
Wow.
into Spanish, and it's just a really fun book. But again,
Yeah.
it goes to that understanding of, I need to do a really good job of researching the
Yeah.
parts that aren't authentically mine, or
Right.
even, I mean, listen, this was during the time when he was very little, so it's not like he knew. This
Right.
is his parents' life, right?
Right.
So he really needed to do a good job of doing the
Yeah.
research and, and putting forth something that made a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I know that publishers use sensitivity readers, right? More and
Right.
more to kind of gauge like, okay, how is this reading? And do you use those in your agency, or you do? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, so the head of Lee & Low, which is a publishing house, changed the sensitivity reader to expert reader.
Expert
Which
reader,
is-
okay.
You know, certainly just a name, but I think it points to that idea that it's not just about being politically correct
Right.
or sensitive to the needs
Yes,
of.
sensitivity
It's
reader
really
has that.
about bringing in an expert to really
Yeah.
talk about whether or not this sounds right,
Yeah.
right? If it makes
Right.
sense, if it all kind of goes together. So we do in our agency, when needed, we certainly have, they do that, our clients do that a lot for one another.
Okay.
And they have critique
Yeah.
groups where they make sure that they have people
Right.
who read it when they're writing about something that maybe could be off,
Yeah.
things like that. So, yeah, so I mean, if needed, we don't, none of us, including, the agents, and our clients, none of us feel that we're experts in everything.
Right.
So
Can't
we'll
be,
bring in as
right.
needed those who
Yeah.
can give us that perspective.
Yeah. Are
Yeah.
those people employed, like, are they paid for their?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so,
That's never-
yeah, I mean, we don't have, we don't have a person because they would not
Yeah.
be an expert reader on everything, but yes, I mean, I think any part of the creative process when it comes to any artistry,
Yeah.
but I can speak specifically about bookmaking, I think everyone needs to be paid. I mean, it is
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
a job, and if we're asking
Right.
them to do it because we can't, then they should be
They should be
paid, so,
paid.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think in critique groups, I think there are times when writers and illustrators do that for one another for free, but that's,
Right.
you know, that's
Yeah.
more of a bartering system.
Yeah, but it feels like more official if it's through the agency or
Right,
the
or
publisher,
through the
right?
publishing house,
Saying
yeah,
like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
this
yeah.
is okay, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this book, A Seed in the Sun by Salazar, interestingly, thank you, yeah, I love that cover.
Yeah.
But it tells a story of a young girl during the time when Dolores Huerta would have been at her height during the farmers' need to unionize
Yeah.
and kind of come together and understand that they had rights and all of that. And I'm pretty sure, I think that there was somebody who's, I mean, Aida has a lot of background herself.
Yeah.
She's a Chicana who lives in California. But I think even our creatives who have some experience, sometimes they want to bring in somebody else who has even more experience than they do about something, right? Especially when it's books that are set back in time when they weren't even alive, or
Right.
you know, so bring in somebody who actually can certify that the experiences that the kids are going through or the adults that are going through these books more than resonate, they're actually accurate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And this is backtracking to a more general question just about agenting. What do you think are what are the most important parts of your job, or what qualities do you think you have as an agent that?
A lot of listening.
Oh,
Listen
yeah.
a lot. Yeah, I mean, I am trying as far as I can to hear a creative's vision for a story and helping them tease that out.
Okay,
the
so
best
you
way
do
possible.
a lot of working with people who are in those initial stages of.
Yeah, and every client is different. I
Yeah.
mean, some come with here's my story fully
Right.
formed. And some of those same clients sometimes come with, here's an idea, what should I do?
Yeah.
And certainly not my job to tell their story, but ask all the questions to help
Yeah.
them tease that out and bring out what makes the most sense for what they're aiming for.
Right.
So a lot of listening, a lot of reading,
Yes.
surprisingly.
A lot of reading.
And honestly, a lot of business sense. I mean,
Yeah.
my job, in bare bones, my job is to sell people's work.
Right.
That is my job.
Right.
So,
How did you develop that after having been a kindergarten teacher?
I don't know where I got it, probably from my
Just
grandfather.
have it.
Abuelo taught me everything I know, so I would say Abuelo. And it's true, I mean, he did have his own businesses, many businesses, so he was a writer
He
himself.
was a writer.
But in order for him to get his work out, he needed to be creative and how to do that. So, so I think a lot of hard work, a lot of paying attention. My partner Nancy is brilliant in every way, and
Yeah.
without her, I would not be where I am. So Nancy Galt gets huge shout out. And I think, and my husband and I have always been entrepreneurial in nature, so I think agenting, when people talk about whether or not agenting might be for them, which, I talk to a lot of people about when they have those thoughts, they come to me to ask me my thoughts on it, and I think if you like having a set paycheck every Friday or something like that, then agenting might not be the place, because you have to make your own work.
Right.
I mean, you have to really, it is very entrepreneurial, and you
Right.
have to decide that you want to get out of your pajamas and, do the job, because nobody's there to tell you otherwise.
Right.
So,
Right, it's sort of like the writer's job.
Right, correct.
Very connected, yeah.
correct. I mean, it is very creative, and
Yeah.
because we're working with creatives, there's that aspect of it, but then figuring out how to do the job itself
Yeah.
and sell the work and have those conversations with editors, because it
Yes.
isn't, you are definitely not selling widgets. You are definitely taking somebody's soul and handing it off to somebody else,
Yeah.
and that has its own set of challenges.
Oh my gosh, yeah. What are the most challenging parts of your job, do you think? Is it delivering
It
bad
depends.
news?
Oh, yeah, I get a lot of bad news,
Oh,
yeah. But yes, I mean, it's certainly a horrible part, but
Yeah.
as I tell all my clients, we only need one yes.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so we try really hard to focus on getting that yes, as opposed to talking through endlessly about the no's.
Right.
that, you know, not everything is for everyone, not every story will resonate with people,
Right.
with everyone, so you just gotta find the person where that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, I like this part of my job, but it is the hardest, it's the constant juggling.
Yeah.
Every day, truly every day looks different,
Yeah.
and there are days when my to-do list is there and I get to cross things off.
Yeah.
There are days when I do all sorts of other things where all my to-do list just to be forwarded to the next day, which I think is not different from a lot of jobs, but it truly, I have never had the same exact day twice.
Yeah,
So.
I'm sure. And I feel like you're dealing with a lot of, I can say this as a writer, needy people who want your attention and like need you to do, you know?
Right.
And you're juggling all of that as well. Seems very challenging.
It is. I wouldn't say y'all are needy. I won't finish the sentence.
You don't
Listen,
have to say it.
I write
You don't have
myself,
to
so
say it.
I really,
Yeah, I was
I have
gonna
to
ask
say,
you
it
about
was
your writing.
really, just getting through a short story was something. And because I know the flip side, I kept it to myself a lot, but I remember sitting there going, I can't believe I am in that spot where I can't read this anymore, and yet I don't know what to do with it, but yet I know it's not finished, so.
Yeah.
It is something else. It is a whole different.
Yeah. Do you write often or?
I write often in my head. Does that count? I think
Sure,
it counts.
that's
Sure,
part of the
it's part of the
process.
process.
It's part of the process.
Yes.
It's all writing.
I do love to write. I don't put it at the top of my priority list.
Yeah, but you do it like
Yes.
an idea comes, or
Yeah, and
this is kind
I do. I have all sorts of things that I've
Yeah.
started and never finished. And
Right.
I love to start things.
Yeah, starting is the best.
Starting is the best. Yes. Some people know. Although I do know some writers who don't like that. I love to start. I can start anything. I have so many beginnings of so many things. I have beginning sentences of 28 novels.
Oh my gosh. Well, when
You know,
you
maybe one day.
retire,
Right.
you can go back.
Maybe one day.
And like something like this, the story, Counting on Esteban, which is in here, was that like not an assignment, but did you write it for this book?
This is the funniest. Yes, I wrote it for allies.
Yeah.
And I'm hesitating because I was forced to do it. To be honest, the two editors happen to be clients of mine, which I know sounds like a little too incestuous, and perhaps it is, but my two clients who were asked to, Dana Allison Levy and Shakira Bourne, who were asked to edit this book, as they were coming up with their list of people who they wanted to ask, they had asked a bunch of people, and at some point they revealed to me that I was on the list, and I'm like, oh, no, wait, hold up, yeah, like, no. And I'm friends with both of them, I've become close to both of them, and they're like, no, this is your time, this is your time. And to be fair to them, I mean, this is a topic that was super close to my heart, and I eventually, and I think in a moment of weakness, said, okay, fine, and so I did it. So I wrote, I made it a goal, and I think I needed to type the end on something, so it was a good exercise, and I was thrilled to be part of it.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I did not force them at all to include me at all. It was the other way around.
It was the other way.
Yes, but it was great, and it was a great experience, I think, for all of us.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And so I don't know if you are able to read for pleasure at all. If you are, is there something you've read recently that you enjoyed, if you can remember? I
can never remember. I mean, I can't remember, because the things that come to mind, I'm like, well, the manuscripts that I read over the past week. But I did read something this summer, and it was an adult book, which is surprising.
Okay.
I'm getting closer.
Okay,
Wow. So give me any adult book. No. Wow. No, and what's going to be horrible is that I actually loved it, and now I can't think of it.
This is why I keep a list. My journal is basically just lists of books.
Right, of books that I have read.
I can't remember.
I did. I was really proud of myself because I'm like, no, I was reading a book.
Was it in a genre, a specific genre, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's coming to me. It's called. It's not the Red House. Or is it the Red House?
No, I know this.
It's,
Andrea,
yes.
yes.
Oh.
Red Island? No?
Is
Something?
it Island?
It's,
Are we gonna look it up? Are we gonna do
I
that?
don't
We're gonna do that. It's Red
We'll look
Island,
it
Red
up.
House, Red.
okay, wait.
It was fabulous.
Oh,
I am so sorry.
no, this.
I'm sure she
this
won't be watching, but
happens
if
to
she
me
is,
all-
just know that I loved your writing
This
tremendously.
happens to me all the Red Island House.
The Red Island,
Andrea Lee.
Andrea Lee.
Yeah.
Andrea Lee.
Okay.
That was fabulous.
Wasn't that?
It really was. It really, really was. I kept telling my husband actually every time I would read, a passage or a
Yeah.
paragraph, sounds ridiculous, but the way Andrea strings words together in a
Yeah.
sentence, I'm like, how did she do that? Absolutely gorgeous writing. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I actually picked it up from here, and it was a staff recommended book.
Nice.
I was in
Love
a
it.
bit of a hurry, and I really wanted a book, and I am like, I trust my South Orange Public Library peeps, and
Yay.
I went up there and I'm like, great, fantastic,
That's
and
the
it was fantastic. It was
Oh,
really fantastic.
that's so good.
Phew, we got through that.
But we got through it. I know
Yeah.
my mother-in-law her book group is called What's the Name of That Book Club, because this is what happens when you're over 30.
Over any age,
Over
I would
30?
say.
Yeah, I know. any
Well, this
age.
happened to me, I was a bookseller for many, many years, and it was truly, and they say this jokingly, and people joke, but it's the honest truth, people walk in and they say, I need a book, it's got a blue cover. And
Oh,
much
that's
like
awesome.
this conversation of me trying to come up with a red house,
Yes.
Red Island house. It was true, and it was like, can you give me more than that? Like, it definitely had a blue cover. And weirdly, often we came up
You
with
can
it, but
find
it was,
it.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was like, well, let's talk through, where did you
Right.
see it, whatever, and eventually you come up with it, but.
Where did you sell books?
I've worked in many independent booksellers,
Yeah.
in Atlanta,
Oh, nice.
and
Okay.
here at Spark House, when we used to have books, I was the
Oh, I
book
didn't know
curator.
Spark House.
So
Well,
I did, when we were in the other location.
Yeah.
So we sold books there, and I was a book curator for that, so I worked there.
Cool.
And I worked at Borders,
Yeah.
and there were Borders in
Miss
Atlanta
Borders.
for a year and a half.
Okay.
So,
That's
yeah,
cool.
I was actually, I went into, I wanted to get book experience beyond the independent booksellers, because my husband and I were gonna open a children's bookstore.
Oh, okay.
And, anyway, so I wanted that experience, and anyway, as a bookseller, I ran across all of those questions, and I was eventually, actually not too long after I started working there, I became the children's book manager, because I knew more about children's books than anybody else. I had no business being a children's book manager, but I was, of the crew, I was the one who knew most, so.
Right. And all of this experience is like so great for your life as an
It is.
agent.
Oh, 100%. I know that my
Couldn't be
road
better.
is not like many others, and that's fine, and I don't think everyone's needs to be like mine, but it really did make a humongous difference to
Yeah.
have all those backgrounds as a teacher, as a
Yeah.
bookseller. I mean, that's why my list of things that I am or have been.
Right.
I worked with authors and illustrators, helping them market their books to librarians and to schools. I have so many different parts of
Yeah.
the book world that
Yeah.
I think it really helps me
Yeah.
in the book business on this end, on the agency
I
side.
would guess so.
Yeah.
I think your clients must be very lucky.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. This was a lovely
tonight.
conversation.
I know it was.
Could have done this for hours.
I know.
Well, thank you so
thank
much.
you so much, Marietta.
You're
And
welcome.
just to tell our viewers that our next program is October 27th, a Thursday at 6. Benjamin Gray will be joining us. He wrote, directed, and produced Blood Ties, which was a very hit podcast on Wondery. And so he's gonna talk about podcasting and about audio world and how it works. So please join us for that.
And just so you know,
Thank you.
I'm leaving all these books by Latinx authors and
Awesome.
illustrators in the library, so come check them out.
Great. I'm gonna steal. Stop.